Good evening. We apologize for our technical difficulties. Unfortunately, we were having some challenges as it pertains to pinning our interpreter, and we wanted to make sure that everyone that wanted to be able to participate this evening would be able to do so. And so we are going to start our program. Today, we are joined by our budget director, Chris Wagner, as well as John, who's our interpreter, who you should see pinned to the screen. I hope you and your families are staying healthy and safe during this pandemic. I am Mayor Lovely Warren, and I know that this past year has been challenging for all of us on many fronts, and those challenges have had a significant impact on our city's budget. That's why I'm glad that you're here with us tonight. This year budget is going to reflect some very difficult decisions, and your input tonight will serve as a guidepost as we consider our choices. When we started doing our early assessment of our budget, we were looking at a deficit of more than $60 million. We've managed to cut that gap in half by identifying some savings and efficiencies. And the recent relief passed by Congress due to the leadership of our Senator Chuck Schumer, who's the majority leader, and of course, our new President Joe Biden, has the potential to improve our city's financial position even further. And we are grateful to them for their tremendous leadership and their work to make this possible. But as we gather tonight, we still have a $31 million off funds gap that remains to be closed, and we still have some very difficult decisions to make. But we've been here before. This will be our second budget during the pandemic. With all that's going on, it's easy to forget the progress that we have made and all of the things that we did before the virus hit. Crime rates were at their lowest point in almost 40 years, and they were getting lower. Rochester was gaining national attention for potential job growth, and unemployment was at its lowest rate in 10 years. Our school modernization program was in full swing. This effort is upgrading our schools and making sure we serve our community as much as possible with community schools to uplift our neighborhoods and help parents and children succeed in learning. But the pandemic interrupted the trajectory of our progress, and last year's budget reflected that. To balance that budget, we had to put some of our capital investments on hold. We furloughed more than 10% of our workforce. We dipped into our savings account. We froze hiring and canceled cost of living increases. All told, we cut the budget by almost 5%. But even as we were making those cuts, we had to come up with new programs to help our residents get through the pandemic. I'm proud of the actions we took to help our citizens through these difficult times. Our first priority was to make sure our children and families had the same access to healthy meals that they did before the pandemic. So when the schools closed last year, we partnered with the school district and FoodLink, so every child had access to nutritious meals within walking distance of their home at our centers. So far, we've distributed almost 2.3 million meals. And we recognize that remote learning could further widen achievement gaps among our students. So we converted some of our centers into learning labs where students could get the help they needed. We also used federal stimulus money to provide free laptops to more than 1,200 students. We're also working to avoid a housing crisis when the eviction moratorium is lifted on May 1st. So we've dedicated millions of dollars of our stimulus funds towards eviction prevention. This includes funds for direct rental assistance, free legal assistance, and landlord grants to help them with needed repairs. And of course, we're working to support our small businesses with some really innovative programs. We created a senior meal restaurant grant that not only supports our seniors with free meals, it creates revenue streams for restaurants. So far, we've distributed almost 30,000 meals to our seniors through this program. We developed a business emergency retention grant to help small businesses pay some of the bills that they had to pay whether they were open or not, like rent and utilities, which had distributed more than $2.4 million to almost 1,000 businesses. And to help our residents protect their circles, we mailed almost 500,000 masks directly to our city homes. While we were doing all this, we kept moving forward with key priorities like Rock the Riverway and our new International Plaza on North Clinton Avenue. And we also continued to work to reimagine and reinvent policing by launching our Person in Crisis teams, which provides trained social workers to respond to calls to help people with mental health problems and addiction issues. We've been able to do all this despite our budget challenges because that's what we do in our community. We help each other. We lift as we climb. And we know it's not enough to deal with the challenges we face today, which is why we're already planning our post-pandemic recovery. The impact from COVID-19 has not been equally shared. We're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Those with less and people of color are bearing a disproportionate share of the suffering. And if we don't do anything about it, that disparity will get even wider. That's why I propose the equity and recovery agenda. It will make sure that Rochester, that we come out of the pandemic stronger and better because we work together. It delivers the equity to our citizens and the structural and institutional racism and inequality, and we deal with that. The ERA agenda identifies 4 key areas to focus on: investments, affordable housing, public safety, jobs, and education. And to be clear, the agenda won't sit on a shelf. We've already taken steps to make it a reality by including it in our budget planning. Just this month, we codify our budget equity tool in the city charter, which means every mayor going forward will have to make sure their spending priorities also considers equity across the board. So yes, we have challenges, but with the new federal stimulus dollars, hope is on the horizon. And as I've shared, we're prepared for whatever comes, and we will keep moving forward to create more jobs, safer, more vibrant neighborhoods, and better educational opportunities. And your input tonight is going to help us do just that. That's why I'm so glad that you have joined us. And now I'd like to introduce our budget director, Chris Wagner, to provide us with a more detailed vision for our budget this year and to show you where we stand with our planning for the year ahead. Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks again to all of you for joining us tonight. Let's start by looking at where our funding comes from to be able to provide the services the city provides. And the next slide. As I go through this presentation, please submit any questions you may have through the chat feature. There will also be poll questions, so please look for those and give us your feedback. So where does the money come from? Our general fund supports many important functions like public safety and recreation services. 3 sources account for 75% of our general fund revenue: property tax, sales tax, and state aid. There are limits on these revenues. Property tax has a 2% cap. Sales tax is a revenue source we don't control. And state aid has been flat and beyond our control. In fact, the state withheld over $17 million in AIM aid from us last June. We expect to get about $13 million of that released to us this month. But the executive budget proposes to cut another $2.2 million this June. Next slide. Where does the money go? This slide gives you a sense of how costs are allocated. In this chart, benefits and capital expenses are assigned to the appropriate department. The total approved budget for 2021 is $529.7 million. This includes all funds, both tax supported and non-tax supported. As you can see, nearly 3/4 of our budget goes towards police, fire, and environmental services. Next slide. This brings us to our first poll question. How important is it that the city invest in the persons in crisis 24/7 response teams? 1, essential. 2, very important. 3, somewhat important. 4, not at all important. I'll read the question again. How important is it that the city invest in the persons in crisis 24/7 response teams? 1, essential. 2, very important. 3, somewhat important. Or 4, not at all important. Emily, if those results are coming in, can you please share the poll results? So the people that responded, 50% identified this investment is essential, and another 50%, so very important. So 100% either very important or essential. Thank you for your feedback. Next slide. I mentioned earlier there are limits on our revenue stream, including aim aid. We also have certain mandates from the state, the largest being the amount we must contribute to our school district, $119.1 million. This chart shows how we compare to Buffalo and Syracuse in these areas. Our general purpose state aid does not cover the mandate that we must give to our schools. In fact, it falls about $31 million short. This is a significant constraint on our budget. Next slide. And as you can see, state aid for accounts for about 22% of our general fund budget, a much lower amount than it does for Buffalo and Syracuse. If we got the same aid on a per capita basis as Buffalo, we would get another $42 million, which would more than close our entire projected budget gap at this point. To be clear, we're not advocating that other cities get less. They depend on this revenue as well. We're simply advocating for equity for Rochester on a per capita basis. Next slide. There are consequences to not having that equity, including pressure on our constitutional tax limit. Rochester's used about 88% of our taxing authority. Higher property taxes. Property tax, state aid, and sales tax are our 3 main revenue sources. Property tax is the only one we control. And when state aid is held flat or declines, we need to raise revenue somewhere. And the state underfunding also contributes to our annual structural budget gap. Next slide. Now it's time for our second poll question. Has your family used any of these city services during COVID? Grab and go meals from the R centers or RCSD sites, free COVID testing, or the learning labs for school students at the R centers? Please select yes or no. Again, has your family used any of these city services during COVID? Grab and go meals, free COVID testing, or the learning labs for school students at our centers? And if that poll is wrapping up, could you share those results, please? So about 67% of you have used one or more of these services. So that's great. We went through a lot of effort to make these services available. So it's good to see that people are taking advantage of them. Next slide. So here are some of the key drivers in our budget gap. Healthcare costs, while they increase at a reduced pace, they still increase 3.75% per year under our current union agreements. This totals about $72 million for current and retired employees in the current fiscal year. Our pension expenditures. Rates had recently flattened, but we saw a spike in pension costs for next year as a result of the pandemic and the stock market declines. This is still one of our biggest expenses, about $44 million in the current year. Wage increases, while they've been modest, and many employees received no increase this year, going forward, we expect these to be a driver of our gap. Capital funding needs. The past couple of years, we've been forced to reduce and defer some capital needs. and we will likely have to do the same thing in 21-22. Ultimately, we will need to invest more than we are doing, or this will catch up to us. We also have constricted revenues, as we've talked about. What does all this mean? Our current funding is insufficient to maintain our services and make necessary capital investments. Something needs to change. Next slide. So what are the options that we have to close the gap? The options we have are find efficiencies, generate more state aid, although as we've said so far, we haven't been successful with this. We actually saw reductions last year and in the executive budget proposed this year. We can increase revenues by seeking outside grants or raising taxes and fees. As the mayor mentioned, the federal stimulus provides a potential opportunity. This is likely one-time funding, so we need to use it wisely. But it can certainly provide some much-needed relief in the short term. We can use our general fund reserves. We've done that in the current year to help mitigate the budget gap. Our budget's been trending positively so far through some of the actions that we've taken, including locking down discretionary spending. So by replenishing those general reserves in the current year, we may be able to roll forward and use some of those reserves to help close our gap next year. And then last but not least, potentially having to reduce programs and service levels. Next slide. As we consider options for closing the gap, one of the key considerations is the impact decisions have on racial equity. As the mayor mentioned, departments were asked to use an equity tool this year as they submitted their budgets, focusing on 3 areas: measuring progress towards equity goals, considering impacts of budget changes on equity priorities, and using community engagement to obtain equitable feedback from the community. Next slide. Which brings us to our third poll question. How important is it for the city to invest in racial equity in city services and programs? You respond essential, very important, somewhat important, or not at all important. Again, how important is it for the city to invest in racial equity in city services and programs? Essential, very important, somewhat important, or not at all important. Emily, if that poll is wrapping up, can you share the results? So 71% see that investment as essential and 29% very important. So again, all of you who responded, 100% saw it as either very important or essential. Thank you for that feedback. Next slide. In terms of our process this year, as the mayor said, we initially projected a $65.2 million gap. That was really a worst case scenario for the pandemic. We revisited some assumptions in the fall, and through some actions we've taken, we have a current remaining gap of about $31.4 million. Department submitted their budgets in February. We're soliciting input in 3 ways: through an online survey, this work session, and a teletown hall that will be held on March 18th. The budget will be presented to council May 14th. Council hearings will be held June 2nd and June 8th, and council will vote on the budget June 15th. The new fiscal year starts July 1. Next slide, please. That brings me to the end of the presentation. I'd like to turn this over now to Sarah Boyce from my office for the question and answer portion of tonight's program. Sarah?
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here tonight. For this last portion of our budget forum, we're looking forward to hearing from you. We will spend a little bit of time on each of the mayor's 3 priority areas, and we would love for you to submit any questions or comments you have on these topics through our chat function. We can then give the mayor and the budget director an opportunity to respond to any questions you might have. As you can see here, our 3 priority areas are more jobs and economic development, safer and more vibrant neighborhoods, and better educational opportunities. For our first priority here, jobs and economic development, these are some questions that are intended to help us generate some conversation. So I will go ahead and read through those and give you a chance to gather some thoughts and perhaps think about what questions you might have on these topics. What is your perspective on the overall economic health of Rochester? What can the city do to improve the number and types of jobs available? Do you believe in Rochester that a person's economic well-being is in part determined by their racial or ethnic background? What type of help do residents need in order to become employed? And what can the city do to help our businesses thrive? So again, please use the chat to enter any questions or comments. We'll start with this one. What is the status of the Rock the Riverway projects? Are they already underway? Perhaps they should be paused to address critical services until the budget situation recovers. Mayor or Chris, would you like to respond to that?
The Rock to Riverway project has been, all are fully funded and they are all moving forward. We are excited about this because of the fact that we are able to keep people working during the pandemic. As you travel down Exchange Street and look at the West River Wall project, you go across the river and you can go and visit the city's new skate park and go up Exchange Boulevard, and you can see what's happening with Charles Carroll Park and all the new changes that are taken there. Or go by the public library and see what's happening there as well, and all the people that are working. And so we are continuing to not only put people to work, but we are also igniting the Riverway and excited about what is yet to come as it pertains to rocking the Riverway. Thank you, Sarah.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Another question is about the types of job training that the city might provide. What types of job training do we have for adults who might be in need of retraining, or for younger adults who might need some job skills?
So we have a number of city partnerships that are in line with our job training programs. And that includes the MTEP, which is our Young Adults Manufacturing Training and Employment Program. And then we also have, that's in partnership with them. And you can contact our Office of Community Wealth Building. Our Office of Community Wealth Building is the director is Dr. Lomax Campbell. And it's not just about training people, but it's also about supporting entrepreneurs. And so we have Kiva Rochester that's run out of that particular office. We also have our financial empowerment centers that's run out of the Office of Community Wealth Building. And, Ramonda Gibson helps with our job skills training program. I believe next week we will be graduating people from our ReJob program, which is our EPA training program, trains people in environmental construction jobs. And so we have about, I believe, 16 graduates from that program. We had to reduce the number because of the pandemic and social distancing, but we didn't want to cancel the program because we knew that people wanted to go to work and they wanted to be trained during this program during this pandemic. And so we also have CEO, which helps with people that are coming home from prison and helps them be able to find employment, but also to work on city streets in our programs so that they can develop a job spec, develop a resume program, and develop their resume so that they can get a full-time job. And so those are just a few of the training programs that we have. But for our youth coming up, we also have our Summer of Opportunity program that's accepting applications now. And so if you are a young person or know a young person or have a child that's of age to work, please have them fill out our Summer of Opportunity program application. We do that in partnership with Rochester Works.
That's great. Thank you, Mayor, for all of those great opportunities. And we have a third question here that's about capital projects. How are capital improvement projects prioritized? Is equity a consideration when the city is choosing which capital projects to fund? So Chris or Mayor, would you like to respond to that one?
I'll start and then I'll pitch it over to Chris. As it pertains to the equity budget tool, last year and this year, we of course consider equity across the board when we're looking at our budget priorities. And I'll turn it over to Chris to speak specifically about how our projects are prioritized. Chris?
Thanks, Mayor. So we have an investment priorities team that actually works on all of the submissions that come in for the capital program. This team meets regularly beginning in September to look at all of the requests that have come in, and we look at obviously available funding, but prioritize projects around things like, what are some mandatory things that we have to do? What are projects that are tied to outside funding, where we've got a city match that leverages a lot of outside funding, impacts on the community at large, and this year we are factoring equity into this review. So we'll be looking at equity impacts as well. So this team makes recommendations to the mayor. The mayor makes final proposals to council. Council will conduct a hearing on the CIP April 28th, and then the final CIP will be included in the budget that goes before council May 14th.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so now we're going to move ahead to our second priority area, which is safer and more vibrant neighborhoods. And again, I'll read through a few topics to help guide the conversation, and you can enter any questions or comments you might have in the chat box. So for safer and more vibrant neighborhoods, how would you describe your overall feeling of safety in the city of Rochester? Should the city make funding of non-law enforcement mental health calls a priority? What housing challenges do you see in your neighborhood? What services or programs highlight racial or any other inequities in our community? And what are your experiences with COVID vaccine accessibility in the city of Rochester? So we have a couple of comments that I'll start with. One comment is this: more needs to be done to clean up city neighborhoods and to fill vacant spots downtown. Mayor or Chris?
So I definitely agree. I've been riding around and it just seems that right after snowfall and the snow starts to melt, you get to see all the garbage that have been thrown or blown because of the trash. And so you will see city crews along with CEO and other partners out there cleaning up the city streets now that the weather has broken. And so we are looking to do that. As it pertains to vacant spots downtown, unfortunately, the pandemic put a lot of projects on hold. And that included some of our projects that we had with downtown. And so we are having meetings now and moving full steam ahead to work to fill those spots and working with our community partners to reignite our downtown.
Thank you, Mayor. My second comment is, please invest immediately in safe and affordable housing.
Well, I can talk a little bit about what we're doing, and we have been investing over the last 5 years, we brought over 3,800 new units online that's affordable. We do recognize that we need to do more between 60% and 30% of the AMI, the median income. And so that's what our priorities are going to be looking at going forward, is that group. We want to build affordable and safe housing for everyone. And so we recognize that there are a number of people that want workforce housing, that want to have a studio apartment or a 1-bedroom apartment, but are overhoused because they have to rent a 2-bedroom or above because of the housing market. And so we're looking at all those options. Actually, we were excited to work with Harvard, program at Harvard Business School, I believe, or the Kennedy School, to really look at housing in Rochester, look at gentrification and all of those issues, and really are looking to put the suggestions to work that they brought forth in that doctoral class.
Thank you, Mayor Warren. Our next comment is about funding for the police department, and it says this: please take a significant amount of funding from the police department and reallocate it into PIC, which is our Persons in Crisis team, into housing, youth services, and other life enriching programs. Rochester needs to be a national leader in the transition away from police as we know it.
We understand that, and we agree. If you look at our Executive Order 203, we are really looking at how do we reimagine, reinvent, reorganize policing here in Rochester. We are making significant investments in the Person in Crisis team. And we're, of course, doing a lot around housing. We talked about the millions of dollars in CARES Act funding that we are contributing to that, and hopeful to do more around youth services, youth sports, and life enriching programs. And so understand the concern. And, there are some things that within the police department that are mandated, meaning that we have to fund. However, we are taking a hard look at what we do going forward and developing a staffing plan and other things. And so we ask that you continue to look at our Executive Order 203. We should be getting that to council on Thursday, and they should be holding their sessions coming up soon.
Thank you. And we have one more question on this priority area, and that is, what are your plans to make streets safer for pedestrians?
So we're building a lot of new bike lanes, designated bike lanes, and we do have a complete street program. And so we're working on that right now. We started on our new project on East Main Street, and also on Mount Hope Avenue. And so for us, we believe that we are going to make the investments necessary in designating bike lanes, as well as complete streets, and working with our community on where those bike lanes need to be. On all of our new projects, we are making sure that we put down bike lanes. I think we reached over 100 miles of bike lanes in the city of Rochester designated, and we will continue to do that. And so we also are looking at bringing in not only returning with RGRTA, our bike program, but we also have been really eager about the new scooter program, and really looking at how do we reduce congestion. And that's through bike share, through car share, through our scooter program. And so we're hopeful that these new innovative programs, as well as the Reimagine program that the RGRTA is starting, would be helpful with moving people forward to not only walking, but biking, and making our city a livable, bikeable city.
Great, that's a lot that's going on. And I said only one more, but I'm going to ask one more on this topic that's just come in. what more can we do to attract economic opportunities to our old manufacturing buildings to create more jobs in city neighborhoods?
So I think that there's a lot that we can do to, it's number one is creating the environment where companies want to come. And we, definitely before the pandemic hit was, had hit the mark. But if you ask many of our community partners, GRE and a number of them, we still have a lot of businesses in the hopper that's coming here. The fact is that Rochester is one of the top 10 cities for recovery, the best recovery as it pertains to the pandemic. We are surrounded by 19 colleges and universities, and so those partnerships is going to be invaluable. One of the things that one of the entities that we have been working with, and Dr. D.T. Ogilvy, who is our professor on loan from RIT, has been working with ROC 2025. And ROC 2025 is an entity that's looking at how do we reignite and excite Rochester for by 2025. And this is a program that's funded by our business community through the chamber. And so we are looking at really in one of their focus areas, of course, is downtown Rochester in our neighborhoods. Also, our Rochester Economic Development Corporation has been really working with a company called Chicago Trend. And they are looking at our commercial corridors, meaning those, the neighborhood corridors, and how they can bring more different types of businesses to the commercial corridor. They've done this in other cities, and unfortunately the pandemic slowed us down, but we're not giving up. We are actually really looking forward to continuing the great work that we started and getting back to really pushing that agenda.
Okay, great. So that wraps up our topic of safer and more vibrant neighborhoods. Thank you very much. So we're moving on now to our last priority area. This is better educational opportunities. And we do have some questions that we will ask, but I'll read through these topics first. Has your family used the Our Center Learning Labs to assist children and youth with online learning during this COVID period, especially while many of the children were fully remote? Have you used your neighborhood library in the last year, either in person or using curbside pickup that was implemented during COVID? Are you familiar with and have you used city summer programming for our children and youth, like the LEAP program, Art Smart, or our youth sports camps? And what suggestions might you have that the city can do to improve educational opportunities for our children and our youth, and also for adults? So here is a question. I think this will go to the budget director, Chris Wagner. The city school district is in bad financial shape. How does this affect the city budget?
Thanks, Sarah. So you may remember that back in 1819, there was a bit of a financial crisis at the district. They overran their budget, and it wasn't known until really after the fiscal year had ended. What happened there was our bond ratings suffered a little bit. We got downgraded by the major rating agencies. And that was really sort of the impact there. So, the lower your bond rating, the more you pay to borrow money. But that being said, our bond ratings are still very good. And since that happened, the school district has recovered somewhat. Their 1920 budget results were very good. They added the fund balance. And so they seem to have turned the tide a little bit here. Generally, the school district is financially dependent on the city. And so, the city bonds on behalf of the school district. But in terms of budget impacts, other than the rates we pay on our bonds, the school district's budget really doesn't impact the city's budget other than the $119.1 million that we give them. That being said, if the school were to sort of default on their bonds or something like that, the city would step in and cover that. So we meet regularly with them to assess their financial situation so that we don't have a repeat of what happened in 1819. And so, like I said, I think they're in certainly in better shape than they were.
Thank you, Chris. We have a question about the library, the downtown library. The question is the downtown library open now for in-person visits and computer use?
Yes, I believe that the downtown library should be opening up next week. The restrictions have been actually lifted. So we are excited about opening back up all of our libraries for in-person visits and computer use. Actually, I believe that the library opened a few weeks ago. What we are going to open up next week is in-person sort of sessions when it comes down to renting out space and having groups as long as they're following social distancing and the rules as it pertains to wearing a mask indoors. So we are open for business with in-person visits, and we are adding bringing back the feature to be able to rent and utilize space in our libraries and our recreation centers to be able to rent those. I know I did not answer the question, and I apologize about the Lilac Festival and the Jazz Festival. I know that they're being canceled, but I did want to note that I believe today some restrictions were lifted and we are able to have events up to about 700 people. And so we are going to be looking to figure out how do we bring back some type of excitement and entertainment for our community during the summer months. I know that last summer was very, very hard because we had no festivals. And one thing Rochester loves is our festivals. And so I really want to thank you all for bearing with us. And we're excited about working with all of our promoters and our organizers to really bring great events this summer as well.
Thank you, Mayor. That's great. And the final question we have is about the summer camps that we operate. Are they expected to be fully functional this year? And maybe that state guidance will affect this as well, but Mayor or Chris, would you like to respond to that?
So I believe that they have released guidance for summer camps. Our recreation centers will be open, and I believe that we will try to continue operating some of our learning labs for our students. And so we're going to try to get as back to normal as possible. And we're excited about having our young people back in our centers and outside on our play apparatuses and playing basketball and doing all the things that we all love to do in the summertime, swimming, and just really excited to see things get back to some semblance of normal. We still will have to recognize that we're in a pandemic, social distancing, washing hands, all those things, but we're going to do it as safe as possible and working with all of our community partners to get it done on behalf of our children so that they can have a great summer.
That's great. I know we're all looking forward to having a better summer than last year, that's for sure. So that's the last question about this topic. And now for our final slide, I will turn it back to Budget Director Chris Wagner. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I want to, thank you all for joining us this evening. We appreciate the questions and the time that you spent with us. I'd encourage you to take the online survey before it closes on the 27th of March. You can go to cityofrochester.gov/budget to see that survey and also sign up for the telephone town hall to take place on March 18th. So thank you very much. Mayor, do you have any last comments?
Again, thank you, Chris, for, I know that we are thankful that our federal government was able to pass the package this week or last week, and that has us looking up. But I really want to thank you and your team for really working hard during this pandemic and making sure that we kept our priorities, our financial priorities in the forefront so that we can continue to serve our residents. I also want to thank our council members. I believe that Council Member Miguel Melendez joined us, and we're thankful for him participating in this event as well. As we go forward, these events, whether you're talking about this session or the teletown hall or the online survey, it gives us the opportunity to hear directly from you, to know exactly what you want as a resident of our city. So please participate. Please tell your friends, your family that live in the city of Rochester to take the survey, to take a moment to take the survey. It's not a long survey. We try to keep it as succinct as possible, so that you're not spending 40 minutes on the computer answering the questions. But we are going to continue to get feedback. We appreciate you all for taking the time to participate in this event, this budget briefing. And we look forward to continuing to work on our budget and to present this budget to City Council in May. Everyone, please have a good evening.